Hello again, this is Rick Partlow here to help you write science fiction that doesn't suck. Today I would like to talk about one of the keystones of writing good genre fiction, or good fiction in general, and that's dialogue. Dialogue, how we have our characters talk to each other, is so incredibly important to how the reader perceives the characters, to building the characters and who they are. Because you can do all the inner monologue you like, you can do all the action you like, but how they talk when they talk is the key to perception. What kind of a character are you trying to build? Is he a grim, violent warrior who doesn't talk a lot? Well, when he does talk, what he says should be meaningful. It should pack not just what he needs to communicate to the other people in the book. It should also pack all the humor that you're going to get from him into it. It should pack all the emotion that he is going to let show into it. And that can be challenging for a character like that. It's easier when you have somebody who's a joker who deals with stress and violence by banter, like Harry Dresden in Jim Butcher's Dresden Files. But dialogue is the key to building a character. Harry Dresden is a character built by dialogue. Both his inner monologue and his dialogue with other characters shows you his personality. It sets up the character arc for Harry Dresden. The problem with dialogue in fiction is that a lot of people try to do it backwards. They try to make the dialogue say what needs to be said to tell their story, rather than trying to make the dialogue part of the story, try to make it part of the character. It's like instead they make it like the little word balloons in a comic book, or what needs to be said so the reader understands what's going on in this picture. But we don't have a comic book. We don't have a picture to show them. The picture we draw them is with words. And if you want to demonstrate who your character is and what kind of a person they are, then the tool you use is dialogue. Now, you would think that dialogue would come naturally, that we listen to people talk our whole lives, we talk to them our whole lives. We have a lifetime of experience in dialogue. But it doesn't, because dialogue in a book isn't the same thing as just talking to people. Now, it needs to sound as if it's real people saying these words, but the words need to be part of the plot. They need to advance the story you're trying to tell. They either need to build the character that you're building or to advance the narrative you're telling. And yet, the tricky part is they can't sound like they're doing that. They have to sound like real things that real people would say. See, what you're doing is you're taking what real people would say and editing it down to something more dramatic, but not overly dramatic. Listen to two people talk. This is a good exercise for a writer. Go to a coffee shop or a restaurant and just sit there and listen to other people talk. There's a shorthand to how people talk, and if someone who doesn't know them is listening in, you may catch a third of what they're actually talking about. And that's why you can't use just how people talk as the guide to your dialogue. It has to be the rhythm of how people talk. It has to have that same cadence to it. But what's said has to be part of the story, has to advance the story you're telling. So what you need to do in order to learn how to write good dialogue is read good dialogue, watch good dialogue, listen to good dialogue, written by the masters in that field. Now, you don't imitate them necessarily. I mean, you can. I mean, some of the imitations, this is serious form of flattery, and it happens in writing all the time. but it gives you a sense of what you need to do with your dialogue. If you're going to be on top of your game, if you're going to be writing dialogue as well as you can, you need to get a sense of how well it can be written. So, people who are known for good dialogue, Aaron Sorkin wrote The West Wing. I really like The West Wing, but it had great dialogue. The scripts for that show are online. You can go download them and read the dialogue as written by Aaron Sorkin. David Mamet, famous screenwriter. I think he's a playwright too. Famous for writing great dialogue. In books, Elmore Leonard is considered a great writer of dialogue. He's the one who wrote I think it was a novella that was the basis for the TV show Justified. And Justified also had great dialogue. It told the story and moved the story along with dialogue without sounding forced, for the most part. Breaking Bad, known for great dialogue. So, read people like Elmore Leonard. Read, for all that he's not known for it, I find that Robert Heinlein had a good mastery of dialogue. He was able to use it in an unobtrusive way to push the story along. It's not something you'd think, hey, Heinlein wrote great dialogue, but when you read his books, the dialogue fits seamlessly, and it doesn't pop out at you as bad, which is quite an accomplishment in writing genre fiction, particularly when he was writing like what was YA fiction before there was YA fiction. So read the masters in the field, watch, listen. That will give you a sense of how to construct dialogue that moves the plot along without sounding forced. Once you write your own dialogue, a key to making sure you didn't screw it up is write a scene that has dialogue in it, read it aloud, out loud, not in your head, not to yourself. Read the dialogue aloud. And when you read it, if you cringe, if you say, this sounds stupid, nobody would talk this way, then you should go back and rewrite it. Because I've come across so much fiction that my response after reading the dialogue in it was, do they really think real people would ever talk this way? It brings to mind what Harrison Ford said to George Lucas when they were filming Star Wars back in the late 1970s. He was looking at the script and he said, George, you can write this shit. You can't say it. And if you can't say what you're writing without it sounding stupid, then you need to go back and rewrite it. And remember, the key to dialogue, the key to good dialogue is brevity. Because you have to get a message across, but how many times do real people engage in long monologues? Very, very rarely. People talk in short snippets. And if you can learn to convey what needs to be said in short snippets without monologuing, because monologuing is just as bad for a fiction writer as it is for a superhero in The Incredibles. Don't have your characters monologue. You can get away with 1 or 2 monologues per book. Any more than that, and it's going to start sounding unrealistic. Unrealistic. You're writing genre fiction. Most of it's unrealistic. It's going to sound like it's not a real person who's saying this. And if you make your characters sound like they are not a real person, then you have lost the reader. The reader needs to identify with your character. They need to relate to them. You want them to be inside your character's head, seeing what's happening in the story. So the character is a substitute for themselves in the story. And you can't do that if your character talks like a 1950s era spy movie starring Cary Grant. And I read something recently where the main character, it's a good book, it was compelling, the story was cool, I was involved, and then the main character opened his mouth And I'm like, does this writer actually think people talk like this in 2021? Or even 1991? Nobody has talked like this, probably ever, but if they ever did, it was about 70 years ago. And this is a book set in the modern day. And the other side of that is you don't necessarily want your main character to sound like someone talking realistically 2021, because your character is not the average guy for the most part. The average guy is not going to be surviving what your main character goes through in most genre fiction. They are somebody who is a step above, so you don't want them reacting to situations the way someone on Dr. Phil would, or Jerry Springer. You want them reacting in a way that your above average person would. And that's going to be part of the dialogue. They aren't going to be, when somebody shoots at them in a mystery or a thriller, your main character who's the hero, they're going to be scared, but they're not going to do what a realistic person would do, is like scream their head off and duck and cover and yell, "Somebody get the police!" Because this isn't you're not writing a documentary, you're writing a thriller or an action oriented book. Your character is going to be a hero. They have to react decisively, so that you're not going to have them say exactly what they even soldiers who are acting heroic in wartime, when they get shot at and it's close, a lot of those people are like repeat. I've seen people like in documentaries where there was an embedded reporter where somebody's saying, "I just got shot at. Somebody shot at me," like over and over, saying something like that. And you're like, "Shut up. We know they shot at you. They're shooting at all of us." And you might have like the character, you have a side character say, "Somebody shot at me," and the main character says, "Yeah, I know, shut up. They're shooting at all of us." But in real life, they would be repeating that 10 times. They're saying, "I can't believe he shot at me." Or, in a more grim situation, if one of their fellow soldiers is hit, they would be repeating that over and over because they're panicking. Like, "Jim is hit. Jim is hit. You got to do something. Get the medics. Jim is hit." They're going to be saying that like 20 times in 10 seconds. And that's real, but that's not how you would write it in your narrative. Everything has to be concise. Everything has to be moving the story along or building character. And maybe you would have one section in your book where somebody breaks down just to show the type of situation where your main character is in and what he could do if he was not, your main character, the protagonist who is decisive and a person who doesn't break down in those situations. But for the most part, your dialogue should contain the kernel of real dialogue, of real people talking, but not the full extent of how they would talk. If you get my meaning, you're chopping things down to their briefest and most concise, version of what they said. Trying to think of a good example of this. For instance, say you're writing a scene where someone is shot at. Your main character shot at. They call the police come, and the shooter's still in the scene, and the police come and talk to them. And in real life, if somebody shot at you and the police came, you'd be like kind of babbling. You'd be like, "Hey, I was over here. I just got home from work, and I was walking through here, and I was doing this, and then I heard something, and then they shot." And they would explain everything in detail because they have to. In real life, you want to give the police all the details you can so they can catch the person who shot at you. But if you're writing a book, you just describe the scene where someone shot at you, at the main character. You don't want to go through all that in their description to the police, because that's going to be repetitive, and it's going to paint your main character in a more desperate and scared light than you want to for your audience. So you would chop that down to something like, "What happened? Somebody took a shot at me. I think they went that way. You've chopped it down to the bare essentials, and you've also stuck with the type of character you want your protagonist to be, and you've advanced that. So, okay, so just the basics of this. If you want to learn good dialogue, listen to people, read, watch, and listen to the masters of dialogue, to the best best written TV shows, movies, and books out there that are known for dialogue. People like Elmore Leonard, David Mamet, Aaron Sorkin. Quentin Tarantino, to some extent, his dialogue is a little more over the top, but it fits the stories he's telling. So, Pulp Fiction, a movie that he wrote but did not direct, True Romance, had some great dialogue for the story it was telling. So, read, write, and listen to the masters in the field, and then when you write your dialogue, read it out loud to yourself. If you can, if you have a friend or family member available, have them read it out loud. Go back and forth with them reading one person then the other and see if it sounds natural. If it doesn't sound natural, then go back to the drawing board. All right, well, that's it for today. If you want to get in touch with me, dutyhonorplanet487@gmail.com or facebook.com/dutyhonorplanet. Thanks and have a good one.